Well, I'm back from my latest road trip. The little beast obviously survived. Desperately needs a wash. While I was out this time, I tried running 91 octane regular instead of the 95 octane premium. The owner's manual says it takes 92, but it's not the octane number as you find on US gas pumps. It's kind of like a Chinese interpretation of 92. So I got it, I ran it, and that worked okay. I mean, it didn't knock, it didn't ping, but under heavier load and higher altitudes, it was definitely sounding a little more ragged, and it took about 10 miles per gallon off of my fuel mileage. And, you know, a couple of pesos one way or the other, it's not a big deal. But if I have to stress the machine to save nickels, no, I'm gonna run the higher octane fuel. I had done some changes on the final drive ratio, dropping the rear sprocket by 2 teeth and upping the engine sprocket by 1. And I ran some local hills in that configuration and decided that was too far, so I put the original engine sprocket back on. I made a second trip up to Malaybalay. My highway mileage went from over 100 miles per gallon down to about 80. And that was even after I switched back to the higher octane fuel. The problem is, to get highway mileage, you need to be running in top gear most of the time. And it was just enough that I spent, I'd say, better than half of my highway time in 4th gear instead of 5th. So I'm going to go back to the stock rear sprocket as well. I got onto a back road that suddenly decided that it no longer identified as a road anymore. It went from concrete to ruts with egg-sized gravel, and about the time I wanted to turn back, it hit a downslope that kind of took that option off the table. Well, long story short, I had a spot where I needed to come to a stop, and in the process the bike got kind of horizontal. Didn't do anything to the tank. I noticed that I put some scuff marks on the front edge of the fender, and the main thing I did was dork the foot peg up and to the rear slightly, and I also pretzeled the gear shift. I managed to straighten the gear shift enough to be functional, but the foot peg is supposed to be further forward. From this angle I shouldn't be able to see the hole where the gear shifter mounts onto its shaft. I already have the replacement gear shifter. The other thing I've had a problem with recently is that it seems to be having an unusual amount of vibration. this is not good. I mean, it's a thumper. It's going to vibrate a little bit. So I went and I took a look at the motor mounts, and I discovered that this one right here is finger tight. There is another one in the rear on the bottom that I can't even reach with my fingers. Socket wrench and an extension should do it. But yes, if the two rear ones are loose, it's going to vibrate more than it should. So I'm going to tighten those up while I'm working on this as well. This is the one that got bent and re-straightened, or semi-straightened, and this is the new replacement. And as you can see, it's really not that far off. One thing that might make a difference is that this one has an extended lock. The bolt that goes through has to pass through a groove on the shifter shaft. So this one is going to sit approximately a 1/4 inch deeper, although the angle here seems to be a little sharper, so it may work out okay. This one actually had about that much beyond the end of the shaft. It was getting wobbly, so this could be an improved design. Here is the footrest assembly after it has been removed from the bike, and it's a little easier to see how the straightness is no longer there. The tool I special ordered to help me straighten out the left foot peg didn't show up. It's either on back order or the people who have it just don't care to ship it out. The odometer is up a little over 7,000, 7,250. That's in kilometers. Tightening up the two rear motor mount bolts made a dramatic improvement in the way it's running. Honestly, it's like night and day. The whole thing smoothed out and quieted down to an extent where I'm beginning to believe those bolts may have been loose from day one. And it wasn't until they loosened up enough to cause a severe problem that I noticed. At this point, I would say it's equivalent to any Honda I've owned, and we'll see. I mean, if it continues to hold up, great. The rear sprocket is still a couple of teeth smaller than stock. I have a road trip in moderately hilly terrain planned for next month. I think I'm going to leave it in place until I return from that. If it works for the driving I'm doing, it should improve my mileage slightly, and if it doesn't, I have the stock one I can throw back on there anytime I get ambitious. Lubing the speedometer cable took care of the jumping needle issue. I still have occasional problems with the tach. When I start it up the first time in the morning, it doesn't want to lift off a 0. So I've had to slap it a couple of times. Yeah, if it gets worse, well, we'll see. But for now, it's not really even an inconvenience.